Do you want a tutorial for coloring a braids and puff hairstyle? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. I don't do a lot of Copic tutorials. I wouldn't consider myself a Copic expert, but I do really like representing all children in the cards that I make because I donate many of my cards to organizations that serve children. And so I try to make a point to make sure that when I color children, I color a variety of ethnicities and skin tones and things like that. And I had challenged myself to figure out a way to color braids and a puff, and so I wanted to share that with you, hoping that it would help and it would encourage more people to be more representative on their cards, because there are a lot of stamps and products out there that aren't very diverse at this point, and sometimes you have to add that diversity in there. But then there are companies who do have stamps that specifically look like different ethnicities. Sweet November is a great source if you want different ethnicities represented in the stamps. They are a digital stamp company, but they also sell physical stamps, and both are pretty representative. I started with Magnolia from Sweet November stamps. I did add a line down the center of her head just because the artist-drawn lines, I don't know that they were intended to be braids. I think they were just intended to look like it was a pulled back hairstyle, and I just wanted the braids to be a bit more evenly spaced. So I'm starting with some W markers. I like them because they are in the black family, or technically a gray marker, but they have a brown undertone because they're a warm gray. And you could use whatever markers you want. This is for an alcohol-based marker, and I'm specifically using Copics in terms of the colors. But what I'm doing is on each line that represents the braid, I am drawing diagonal lines. They're very short. They start at the top and they go diagonal down towards the face. And that is how I chose to represent braids, looking at photo references. But there are other ways, and I am going to share other artists who are coloring black hair, and I'm going to include some black artists as well, because obviously I'm not an expert in hair, but in general, but specifically black hair. And so I'm just trying to do my best based on reference and studying what I can from others, but I want to make sure that I give credit to any artist that I have observed anything from, so they will be linked in the video description. So I also want to make sure that at the end, you're going to see some of her scalp, because if you do braids, your scalp's going to show through. Your scalp is lighter than the rest of your skin because it doesn't get sunlight. And also when you pull your hair for braids, it put some pressure on the skin there. And so that skin does tend to look lighter even than your natural skin tone. So I took an E42 marker and I just added it between the braids so that there would be that coat of color underneath, so that when I leave some white space between the braids, that there is that representing the skin color coming through. This is a very cartoony style. The images from Sweet November have a cartoon style. As you can see, her hands are kind of like mittens. They don't have individual fingers. And so I am trying to maintain that cartoon style, and this is not necessarily the most realistic tutorial for drawing braids. Once I have those big diagonal lines, I want to keep going, but I want to get finer. So I started with the W10 and I made big lines, and the W7 and I made big dashed diagonal lines. As I come in with the lighter markers, I am going to be making much thinner, but similarly, they're not going to be so much diagonal as a swoosh at this point. So they're still coming from the top of the head and swooshed down towards the front of the head. And I want this to start looking like individual strands of hair. I started with the W markers because they have that warmth to them. But now I'm going to move into a dark brown marker, because often when we see someone's hair and we think, oh, they have black hair, yes, there's still going to be a lot of other colors inside of their hair. There's still going to be some browns and some other tones, and I want to represent that. I want hair to look natural in the sense that no one's hair, all the strands are the same color. And especially when you're pulling out individual strands like I'm doing here, I'm doing this really flicking motion to pull out those individual strands. I want that color and that depth to show. So I have a very, very light hand here in terms of barely touching. And this is something you do need to practice. So in order to get that really light swoop in there. It's something where you just want to flick on another piece of paper so you can get about the thinnest line. And you can see here, I also sometimes stand my marker more straight up, and that helps me to get thinner lines. You also want to make sure your marker is not over full. I am sorry, like I said, I am not a Copic expert. I'm not very good at filming tutorials for Copics, but my main goal here was to share some ideas of how to achieve this hairstyle so that I can encourage others to increase their diversity. So what I'm doing for the poof part of her hair, or the puff, sorry, is I am starting with swirling motions, C's and circles to create the curl. I took my darkest marker and I put the curls more tightly together at the bottom, because when you gather your hair, it's going to be darker where it's all gathered up. And then as her afro puff kind of comes out, it's going to get lighter towards the top. And I want to represent that by making the dark curls concentrated towards the bottom of her head and towards to the top of her head and where her little hair tie is, because that's where it's being all pulled together. And then I'll get lighter as I go out. You'll always see those markers there in the quarter. So if you're wondering which ones I'm using, it's the same markers I used earlier, that W10 for the darkest part, W7 also. There, I don't want them to be too close together because I do, again, want those different colors of hair. I did put an overall coat of, I believe, the W3, because I want it to look like her hair, like there's going to be basically kind of gaps in her hair, but not to the extent that you like fully see through it. So I want a really light color to coat everything, and then continue with the curls in all of the different colors I chose, like the E47 and the W5, until I've filled out her puff. I'm going to work on her skin tone next. I chose a series of E3 markers. There are a lot of skin tones out there, and I think what it's important to remember is that pretty much all of your brown markers can and should be used to represent different people, and two people of the same race could have vastly different colors of skin, and so there's no like one combination for any ethnicity or race. And so I just kind of experiment, and sometimes I'll use like the E1 series, E19753, and sometimes I'll try the E3s or the E2s. It really doesn't matter. But there are ways to add interesting depth to any skin. And you saw that I started with a purple marker. That is to bring out more of the undertones of our skin. None of us are any like particular shade of brown, tan, white, whatever. There's always some there's pinks and there's yellows and there's purples and all kinds of stuff that add depth to our skin. And I'm not going crazy with that because I am not a trained artist. It's just something that I have seen artists do and I see how it is successful. So I add just a little bit of a BV in a very light color. So a BV01, BV00, something like that, only to my shadow areas, because I find it adds a little bit of depth, but I don't go crazy with it because I don't understand completely how that color works. Again, there will be other artists linked in the video description for you to learn more from. I try to make my shadow colors, especially when coloring a large image like this, small. I want that shadow to not overwhelm, and I want that lightest skin tone or that lightest color marker to be the main color I use for their skin so that they look nice and bright and they kind of glow is my thought. That is just what I personally prefer. And then I do want to add a little bit of shape to her nose. The artist drawn lines are very simplistic, which I think is great because I prefer, as I said before, a simplistic cartoony style that, and even that, I don't feel like I entirely understand all the areas to add shadow to, but I kept it real simple and I put shadows on each side of her face. So on the top left and the bottom right, I added some shadows mostly. And that was just to kind of give her this a bit of a rounded look, just add some depth and dimension to her face. But then around her nose, I did want to extend her nose a little bit because there was really only lines by the bottom of her nose. And so I pulled my darkest color up along the bridge of her nose, and then I blended it out. So that's another little shadow area. I do think that interest to the nose adds a lot. The artist who draws these images for Sweet November is also an amazing Copic colorist, and she is one of the people that I'm going to link in the video description because she shows you how to add a lot to her stamps if you want, but then the images are kept more simple so that you don't have to go into all that detail if that's not your jam. And a lot of these tips can be used on smaller images. So I'm going to color her clothing now, and that's going to be really simple, and that's kind of not the focus of my tutorial, so I'm just take a minute to mention. So if you have a smaller image, you can do a lot of the same things in terms of keeping your shadow really small, adding little details like if you want to draw in something, drawing it with your darkest shadow color and blending it out like I did with the nose. The puff in her hair, you can do very similarly if you have an image with a smaller puff. You can add a puff to images that don't have it. Like sometimes you'll have an image that has just like a simple bun, but in order to make it more representative, I will often take a bun and add some curls to it to make it look more like an Afro puff. And so I would use the same techniques just on a much smaller scale. But when I want to demonstrate, I want to show it bigger. So I'm going to do the same thing in her clothing as I did with her skin in terms of my shadow areas. I'm using like 4 colors for even these smaller bits of clothing. But that's again so that my shadows can stay really deep, but I can blend out to a light color and make that light color dominant. I'm going to keep the colors here simple in terms of making her shoes and her shirt match, and then I'm going to pull that color into the card so that she's more of the focus and not so much the other colors that are going on. And also her little hair tie is going to be purple, just so that again I'm not adding like too many colors to the situation, and I've taken my time to focus in on being more authentic as much as my cartoony style allows with her hair and her skin. And then when I have, I like to use E04 for mouths, and I feel like that color works pretty universally. So even for lips sometimes, just to give a more natural look, because I think our tendency is to go a little bit more like red or pink with lips, and E04 has a little bit of red in it, but it's still distinctly a more natural brown color, and I think it works very well for children. I'm going to fussy cut her out. Sometimes it's really awesome to draw a whole scene around characters like this, especially if you love to Copic color, and I've done stuff like that before. It's not something I typically do a tutorial on, but again, there's going to be people in the video description who will be able to share a lot more in terms of more tutorials about drawing with Copic markers, adding those backgrounds in. And you can check me out on Instagram at jess.crafts because I do share more Copic coloring on Instagram. I share my more elaborate scenes. It's just something I often don't film because I don't feel like an expert or necessarily that I have a lot to say on it. So yeah. Okay. I want to make this into a card though, because that is my thing. I like to make cards. Coloring and doing art and stuff is really fun, but I also want to make sure that I'm sharing it out into the world because I do it for myself in terms of I find it really relaxing, especially Copic coloring. Like there are times that I feel really stressed out that taking the time to color something can give me some time to work through my thoughts or just even just relax. So if I don't turn them into cards though, then I can't share that with others. And I really want that to be what I do with my crafting, is to bring others smiles and joy and things like that. So like I said, I donate a lot of my cards. This time I'm going to make these birthday cards because there's an organization, and if you go to jesscrafts.com, and I can't remember the /, I'm sorry, it will be linked, but like basically like card drive resources, I think it is. If you go to jesscrafts.com, you'll see it at the top, and it will link you to a bunch of places where you can donate your cards, and you can donate 1 card or you can donate an entire box of cards. And you don't have to be a professional artist by any means, as you can tell, but it can be simple, like drawn on construction paper cards, whatever you want to do to bring happiness to others. And so yeah, there's one that's specifically geared towards birthdays. And I wanted to make my cards birthday cards today because I thought it would be even more important to receive something special and unique to you on your birthday. So I have the Paper Rose Rainbow Poppies paper, and I have a card sketch that tells me how to cut my paper so that it leaves no scraps. And I actually have 2 of this colored, the Magnolia stamp from Sweet November. I have 2 of them colored, and so I'm going to make 2 cards. And this is a no scrap template. So basically, I have templates on jesscrafts.com that tell you how to cut one piece of 6x6 or 6x8 or 8x8 or 12x12, all kinds of paper sizes, and make cards with no scraps. And so this is just one of them. I'll link it to you in the video description. If you enjoyed this video, here is another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.